Alright guys, how are we doing today? Okay? Hope you're well. First thing to say is, in today's video, that you'll actually be able to hear me properly. I do apologise about yesterday's video, it was a bit noisy. And yeah, so today will be a little bit more professional, I guess, maybe. And I want to say that I also apologise for the length of the videos. I know they're quite long, but sometimes it's difficult to get through everything you want to say in a when we're talking about deep, philosophical points or deep discussions about all sorts of things. So it's tricky sometimes reducing everything down and trying to make all various points without trying to simplify everything and trying to add some degree of nuance to things and not just relying on not just simply just relying on my own biases and just saying that's the reality of everything I'm saying. But just to be just for transparency, really, I just want to make that clear and say it from the outset of this video, and this will apply to all my videos going forward. Is that these are just a series of personal opinions and observations about the particular topic that I'm talking about. And that doesn't mean that the things that I'm saying are absolute facts, or that I'm giving an absolute true breadth of thought or opinion or knowledge about anything, because I'm not. Obviously, I'm only one person, and there's only so much I can say. There's only so much nuance I can give. I can't say everything there is to say about any given topic that I choose to talk about. But anyway, so just to make that clear that this video, among the many others that I've done and those that are to come, are just my opinions. Right, that's all I can say. This is just what I think. I don't expect everyone to agree with what I say. I don't expect everyone to like the videos or the length or the topic, the way I describe things or the language, and that's fine. I accept that, I'm just one person and that's just how it is, right? So with that said, I want to, in this video, talk about family. And the reason that I've been thinking about family for the past couple of days now is because of, well, there's a couple of things really. It's obviously something that we all think about. It's something that's it's just a part of our everyday lives. Family is our life, isn't it? And I guess it's a couple of things really. A sense that family isn't always family, and that family can be extremely complicated and extremely messy, and sometimes actually quite dark. And I'm going to sort of touch upon a few different things in this video today. And I think the first thing to say here is, what is family? What does it? What actually is it? We know biologically who our family are, but what does it really mean to have a family? What should a family be? What, apart from just people that live together and obviously a shared share a DNA and all that kind of, obviously part of the same family tree. But I mean, what does it mean to be a family? What does that really mean? Does that mean teaching each other? Does that mean helping each other grow? Does that mean entertaining one another? Does it mean loyalty, love, compassion? Keeping each other in check? Protecting one another? I suppose it could be all of those things. Some people might argue that it's a couple of those things, or there should be some of those things are stronger contenders than others, or that some of those things should have more priority in families than in one's family than in other areas. And I think that ultimately, for me, family is, it's not just that we share, we're bonded by blood, as it were, but we are, I suppose for me, family is something that you feel comfortable inside, you feel connected to, you feel like it feels like a natural extension of who you are. It feels like something that is something that you can feel comfortable inside of. You feel like it's something that you can always kind of rely on. I guess it's something that's always there for you. Something that's not quite never changing, but some kind of a constant in one's life. I guess it's a presence, maybe. It's things. It's sharing things that only families get to do together. Like sharing, Christmases and birthdays and certain events and things like that. And it's a thing of, it's a protective group, perhaps, in some way, that's there for it's your own tribe, isn't it? I guess maybe is maybe a way to put it. A bit of a tribalistic kind of a thing. It's your little tribe, isn't it? It's your little piece of life. It's your little fabric that you get to call yours, and we all have one. It's just that some are more healthy than others. But it's not always as simple as that. I think that family can be very much divided. It can be very inconsistent in many respects. It can be damaged, which often makes family dynamics very awkward, very strange, very uncomfortable at times. Family isn't always family. Family isn't always. It's not always. It's not always what you want it to be. I think a lot of people would agree with. It's not always what you need. It's not always what you want. Family can be distant, can be cold. It can be very dismissive of you in some way. You can be very dismissive of it, or certain people in the family. Sorry, I don't know why I'm so itchy today. And I would just say that family is a mashup of both good and bad. It's a mixed bag, isn't it? It's a mixture of different personalities, different life stories, different experiences, different ideas, different generations of thought and values and outlooks, even. goals, experiences, memories that shape, just as your great grandparents shaped your grandparents, and obviously the shaped that our parents and that our parents shaped us, and whether having kids out there, they're shaping their children's lives, and so on. It's I guess a family is a continuing cycle of change, as strange as it is to say. It's a constant change, and it's the only thing you really can call yours, isn't it, in this world? I think, it's the only thing you can really truly say is, for the most part, is an organic thing. It's something that ties you to this planet. It's something that ties you to where you are. It's something that becomes you, in a sense. It has a big role a big influence on who you become, who you want to become, what things are held up, or what standards are held up in that household, what are the values that shape who you become, the experiences, the learned experiences, the things that your parents pass on to you, how that influences the type of person you become or don't become. So it's family is perhaps the realest thing you can have in this existence that we call life. It's the most natural, grounded thing you can really have. It's the realest thing you can have. But that doesn't make it perfect. Far from it. There are a lot of people out there that have very difficult relationships with their parents, their grandparents, their children, their siblings. A lot of people who are very different from one another, very different interests, very different tastes, very different goals, very different lifestyles, very different attitudes, and very, very seriously, dramatically divided, let's say, by personality. I have two brothers, a younger and older, and I have a sister, and each one of us is very different in our own right. We're all our own people. There aren't really that too many differences between us, I don't think. I think we are all we've all got our kind of little eccentricities, our own little idiosyncrasies, we've all got our nuances. We share some degrees of similarity, I suppose, in some senses, but in many respects we are very different people. Now that's a good thing. I don't. That doesn't necessarily bother me, although sometimes I wish we were a little bit more similar, perhaps. But in a way, it's good because it keeps us kind of all. I suppose we kind of sort of ground each other, I think. And maybe that's an important role for family, is to keep each other grounded to a point that we stay level-headed, and we try to keep each other in check to some extent, I guess. But we also, we are perhaps in some sense a bit of an anecdote, sorry, a bit of a kind of, maybe an anecdote, maybe, but I think we are a kind of, it's difficult to explain it. It's very difficult to put into words, really. We kind of, we try to keep each other on the straight and narrow, I think, for the most part, I would say. We all have our own lives. We all, we all try to do our best for each other in the small ways that we can. Certainly, now that we're all adults. As children and as young people, it's a bit different. But I think as adults, and certainly for the last couple of years, I think for a lot of those in their late 20s or 30s, I think there's a much, well, certainly for my family, there's a much stronger bond between us all now, maybe than there used to be. And there's more of a sense that we try to kind of look out for each other, I think. Whereas maybe years ago, we sort of did, but we were all kind of still sort of figuring ourselves out. Whereas I think now that we've all had a bit of time to sort of mature a bit and sort of become our own people in our own rights, it's like I think things have sort of smoothed out a bit, maybe. And so I think it's about give and take. I think family is also about patience, about giving each other time to it's about giving them space to be themselves. It's not enough. It's not enough for. It's not right for you to try and dictate or heavily influence your siblings' lives in any way. I don't think. I think you have to give advice where you can, but ultimately you have to let them live their own lives. You have to, and they need to respect that you have your own life and you want to live your own life. But from time to time, it can be very useful to have that emotional support, that psychological support. And perhaps in many respects, it's the most genuine form of support and advice you might get from someone. So I think all of that is part of family. It's not just a sort of unit of people that share, genetics and DNA. It's not just that. It's more of a, it's a cultural, social, combination that makes a family. It's not just like, oh, you're my brother, you're my sister, you're my father, you're my mother. It's the things that make those things those things. It's the way that we approach people based on how we respect them and whatever roles that they play, I guess, if you like, in those dynamics. And as we grow out, those kind of relationships change, those dynamics with those same people change, as you would expect. You can't expect to treat your father the same way you did as father at 30, or let's say at 50. Let's say you can't treat your father the same way at 50 as you did when he was 20. I don't think I think there are a lot of there's a lot of a family. It's a structured thing, but it's a fluid thing to some extent. I think it's an evolving thing. It's not just yes, they are my parents, yes, that's my sister, those are my brothers, that's my uncle, that's my aunt, etc. That's my grandmother, that's my grandfather, right? But it's like your relationship with these people changes, I think, as time goes on. If God bless them, if my grandparents were still alive today, I would have had a very different relationship to them at the time that they passed away. When my grandmother passed away in 2008, so I was 18 then, and my grandfather passed away when I was 25 in 2015. So it's been a long time since those people passed away, and I'm not the same person I was exactly. In some ways I am, but in many ways I'm not the same person I used to be. So the relationships I had with them obviously would be very different now. And certainly my relationship with my mother and father has changed over time, as you would expect. But I think as well with my siblings. But I would say that maybe I think probably I've developed maybe a bit more of a bond with my siblings than maybe in some ways than my parents, because I tend to speak to them more often, and we stay in touch with each other a lot more frequently than I do with my father and mother. But that's because they're kind of sort of stubborn and stuck in their own ways, sort of got their own issues and things like that. And so I just sort of for my own sake, sometimes I kind of try to keep them a bit sort of at arm's length sometimes. It's not because I want to do that necessarily, but I just think that sometimes, family can, as much as it can be beneficial for you, can also hold you back. And it can also be damaging to your mental health. It can be damaging to your evolution as an adult, I'd say. And so I think that although obviously family is massive, my family is massively important to me. Sometimes I have to have a bit of a I have a messy relationship with my family. I think is the truth with everybody in my family. I don't think I can say that I have a perfectly healthy relationship with any of them really. Not bad relationship, but maybe not as great as I would like to have. But I think a lot of people probably feel like that. That they can't be everything that they want to be for everybody all the time, and they can't be everything that you want them to be, and there are differences, as I said. My brothers, for example, my older brother's into football. My younger brother, likes rock music, for example. My father is into I don't know, like historical stuff, and like punk, and like sort of like certain types of electronic music that I'm not that particularly interested in. My mother is sort of very into her soap operas like EastEnders, Coronation Street. Just to give you a few examples there. I mean, there's a lot of differences, as you'd imagine. They're all very different people. But you try your best. You try your best to you meet people where they are. You accept that that's just how my mother is. I accept that's just how my father is. That's just how my sister, how my brothers are. That's just how they are. And I hope they accept me for who I am. For all of my fuck ups and flaws, differences, weird, eccentricities, whatever. So, family is. It's not that it's not, and there's not some one size fits all thing here. Like, this is how I think a family should be, or this is what would make a perfect family. I don't know what is a perfect. I don't think once there is such a thing. Personally, I think all families are incredibly very messy, sometimes very difficult, sometimes sort of awkward. It can be very awkward. I think as you get older, dealing with your siblings, because you're all going through your own journeys, you're all going through your own experiences, and maybe not everybody maybe matures in the same way, not everybody grows in the same ways. People diverge, people go down different paths in life, people want different things, and you just have to accept that. That's just how it is. But hopefully, what matters the most is that you've got their back as best as you can, and they've got yours. And that's if you're lucky. If you're lucky to have a family, if you're lucky to have relatives that care about you, have a relatively good relationship with, even if it's maybe not the best, or maybe it's not. Maybe maybe I think a fair thing to say is that there's often a lot of baggage in families. I think that most people would admit that there's baggage between siblings. There's baggage between siblings and daughters and sons with their parents, parents with their parents, and, sort of the dynamics of family connections and things can get kind of really complicated and tricky at times. There are a lot of things that divide people in families. There are a lot of things that people fundamentally disagree on. There are a lot of things that members of families have very different perceptions of, memories of even. And yeah, it gets very messy. Relationships with family can be extremely messy. But hopefully, for the most part, you've got a relatively solid familial foundation for most of your life, or at least a good chunk of it before. At least I hope for all those that watch this video that you will have a long and as relatively happy and healthy a relationship with your family as you possibly can, because once you start to lose members of your family, like your grandparents, and I think and I've yet to deal with the inevitable that my parents are obviously going to pass away at some point. Maybe in the next 10, 20, 30 years, I don't know. Hopefully it's a long time, a long way off. But at some point, that is a reality that me and my siblings are going to have to deal with. They're going to have to accept. And or maybe one of my siblings passes away, or I die before them, or whatever's going to happen. But that all of that's family, isn't it? All of that stuff, loving people, being loyal to people that you care about, that you would that gave things up for you, sacrifice. It's serving others in a way, I suppose. That families are about more than just yourself. Or at least it should be. But then there are the other sides, the other realities where you have members of your family that are sometimes seen as the black sheep, sometimes seen as the moral ones, sometimes seen as the troublemakers or the questionable characters, let's say, who can't quite seem to decide whether they're family or not, or whether they want to be family or not. You've got all sorts of spoken dynamics between people that in families that don't particularly talk to each other very often, and there are usually reasons for that. Or when they do, it's not usually in any real. It's very kind of sort of everything's very kind of overly polite, let's say, and overly. What's the right way to explain it? Very carefully handled. That's probably a better way to say it. Maybe there's some tensions somewhere along the line between sisters, brothers, sons and fathers, sons and daughters and mothers, or daughters and fathers, or sons and mothers. Differences in parenting styles, different generational attitudes that cause rifts between people. Family secrets, of course. Sometimes, drug abuse, domestic abuse, sexual abuse. Money that's gone missing. What else? Inconsistencies of how money's being handled out. Think issues with people's what seems sometimes a lack of fairness. What seems to be a lack of fairness in people's wills. Sort of families keeping people out of the loop in certain things, certain members out of the loop of certain news and things, that kind of stuff. It can get very dark, very, very dark. And sometimes it is, although your family, yeah, still your family, sometimes you are better off, if you can, to try and set the terms of how you want, what kind of relationship you want with your family, and who you want to call your family within your own family. And for some people, they have such a degree of trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder and identity issues and mental health problems and all sorts of things that in the end they basically say, I love my family, but at the end of the day I'd rather not be around them because I think that they're damaging me or I'm damaging them in some sense. And so some people sometimes try to escape, start new life, start new identities. Some people just, there's some families never hear from a certain family member again, or they don't for decades, or like I said before, there's secrets in the family. People, there are affairs that have happened. There are really, really difficult things that happen, especially when it comes to money, that can really drive wedges between families very, very quickly. False promises, lies. Lying is a big one, a major issue in a lot of families. Just keeping certain knowledge from people, deliberately withholding information, withholding something that people should know about, but whether it's an illness, whether it's a death, whether it's some kind of as I've said, like some kind of marital affair, maybe, or maybe some kind of a child that people don't know about, or maybe it's an abortion that people didn't know about in the family, or maybe it's an extra member of the family that most of the family never knew about, so on and so on. There's so many things you could mention here. So, family isn't always family, is my point. Family isn't always this clean, sophisticated, warm thing. I think that people would like to think it is. It's very, very messy. And I think the older you get, the more you realise that, the more you start to question things. I have an uncle who had never been, for example, I had an uncle on my father's, my father's brother, um, who, as far as I knew, had never married anybody. And I'm saying this with the deepest of respect for him because I really loved the man and I really respected him for all sorts of reasons. He was a good man, a good, very, very good man, big heart, and a very generous, kind, decent person all round. So let me make that clear before I say what I'm about to say. But he was someone that, as far as I knew, never married, never had a partner. And I've been kind of questioning, sort of thinking about, why was that? Why, what kind of relationship did my grandparents have? What were my dad's parents like? Really, truly like? I met I knew my dad's mother for many years, and I knew my mother's father for many years. Well, I knew him for about 20 years. And I knew my dad's mother for about 15 years before she passed away. So, they were there for, up until my teenage years. But I never really truly knew them. I knew a perception of them as my grandparents, just like my parents. I think we all do. We all have a certain image of each of our family members. We all have a certain perception of who they are. And it's not always accurate. It's who we want them to be. So we've kind of formed to be in our own heads, I guess. We kind of treat family members as almost characters, really. We treat people as, I don't know, just like we don't always see people for who they are. We see them for who we want to see them, and I think that's especially true for one's grandparents, for one's uncles and aunts, right? Maybe even cousins as well, I suppose. But I think especially, the closest ones to us, in fact, many cases, we often kind of build up a kind of glorified, somewhat of a naive picture, I think, of a lot of people. We don't always know the people that we talk to the most. The people that we are the closest to, whether it's friends or family, partners even. We don't often really know who they really are. We know their habits. We know certain things about their past, but we often don't really truly know who they really are underneath the skin. On a deeper emotional, psychological level, we don't really truly know what they think and what they feel about us. I mean, how often do we sit down with our family members and have a heart to heart about anything? Probably very rarely, right? We might express certain parts of ourselves, but it's very rare that we ever fully disclose everything about ourselves. Even with the people that are the most loyal, most loving to us, most decent, most kind, most caring to us, we always, in a way, it's almost like we protect ourselves more from the people that we're flesh and blood with. We try to. I think we try to kind of keep up a sort of image, a perception that they want us to continue to be. I think, and I think we do the same with our those outside of us. Outside of in the wider family. I think we all have a kind of perception of, oh yeah, that's like if someone says, well, what, everyone would have an image of I'm sure, some kind of almost a caricature of each of their family members. I'm sure everybody could probably draw a picture of every single family member and pick out maybe 3 or 4 traits, but that's probably about it, really. It's like, you can talk to your family almost every day, but still never really truly know that much about on a deeper level, because most of the time families tend to kind of, there's a lot of humour in that. I think, well, certainly my family, we tend to kind of deal with things a lot through either complaining or humour, a mixture of the two. Whereas we don't really talk about ourselves. We don't really talk. We talk about each other. We talk about certain things, but we never really delve into us. We never delve into each other. We never really ask in any real meaningful way about each other's lives and things like that, because there's this feeling like, we just don't do that. That's not what we do as a family. So my family's a bit of an emotionally distant family. I think it's probably fairly accurate description. I think for my family in particular, not heartless, not exactly cold, but certainly not very warm. I would say a lot of the time. I would say out my entire family, I would say really there's probably only really ever been maybe 2 or 3 in my family that I would sort of deem to be sort of warm, come across as kind of friendly and welcoming, and maybe 4 actually. In my immediate family, like I would say, there's probably only really maybe 2, maybe, and that isn't some like verdict on everybody else. I'm saying, oh well, everyone's bad or everyone's um, lacking in humanity or something. I'm just saying that they're all different people, that they've all developed psychologically, emotionally, maybe even spiritually in some ways that have diverged from my own. That they're not, they've dealt with life in their own ways. They've gone on and had their own world, their own little world, if you like, been in their own little world, as have I, for the past 10, 15, 20 years. So I think it's important to remember that your brothers, your sisters, your parents, your grandparents, your uncles, aunts, whoever, they are their own people. They've had their own difficult lives, difficult circumstances, troubled times. They have their own deep, very personal, very private stuff going on. And I think as you get older, you must recognise that is not, that there's not really much you can, it's not, it's funny because it's like, is it your place to really like get into any of that stuff with them people? Is it my job as a brother or a son to delve into any kind of personal, private stuff about my siblings' lives and my parents' lives? I don't know. It depends what it is, I guess. Some people might say it depends whether they want to or not. And it's like, I might want to times, but they're not willing to, or it's the other way around. Sometimes they might want me to start to have a conversation about something that I don't really want to. And that's the problem. It's like, there's only so much you can say. There's only so much you can express with your own family. That's why people end up with friends. That's why people sort of develop their own family, because they feel that there's deficits, there's deficiencies in their own families that they personally feel that they need. And I think when you've got issues in families like trauma, like baggage, like betrayal, like issues of trust and respect, it can get difficult to continue to feel like you have a healthy, normal family. And I, as much as I don't want to admit it, I think that I haven't exactly grown up in the healthiest of families. All right, not the worst, but certainly not the healthiest, not by any stretch. And I think my siblings would certainly agree with that for all sorts of reasons. Mainly alcoholism and domestic abuse, but let's not go there. So, and there's all sorts of like different sort of. There's often in families a lot of inconsistencies in terms of loyalty, obligations, differences in respect, differences in perceived worth of certain individuals in one's family, and that often dictates how they treat certain members of their family. Some people feel like they belong to their family, and some people feel like all it really takes really sometimes is one or two people to ruin your relationship, to create damage in that family, and that can sometimes trigger a response where, even though they might get along with other members of the family, that they sometimes walk away from it. People do that. People do walk away from their own families. They run away. They start new families. They start new lives. And they're never heard from again. Often not heard for many, many years. And that's often down to, well, a lot of the things I've discussed in this video. So I'm not going to keep repeating myself, but I think that people have a lot of issues going on at any given time, and sometimes things push people over the edge. And if people's connections with members of the family are already kind of fractured anyway, then sometimes people justify it to themselves to just leave. And some people, regardless of whether people care or love them, feel that they're still not accepted, that they're not really treated in the same way, whether that's actually what's going on or whether that's just a perceived thing. And so a lot of people feel like I love my family, but I don't really fit in. I don't really feel like I'm accepted here. I don't really feel like I'm acknowledged really properly. And so some people just say, well, I'll start my own family. I'll carve out my own existence without you wanting it. And sometimes that's the right thing to do, actually. Sometimes when you've got really negative, self-destructive, self-sabotaging members of one's family, sometimes that's the right thing to do, is to kind of walk away. And maybe not necessarily to just never talk to them ever again, but it's sometimes it's necessary to keep people at arm's length. Because if you try to set boundaries with people and they don't respect that, or they just have no boundaries whatsoever, then you have to put your foot down. You have to say, if that's the kind of life that you're willing to accept, that's on you. If that's the kind of life that you want for yourself, that's fine. That's your life. I personally don't want that. And you have every right to do that. It's not easy. That does mean that then you're going to have a bit of a difficult relationship with that person, or several people, potentially, because there's always loyalties that there's always going to be loyalties in the family and allegiances that you're not a part of, or that you don't really fully understand, or you don't fully understand the gravity of. And so one of the big things that I think makes family is the ability to reconcile. Is the ability to forgive one another. Is the ability to, at times, if possible, is to sit down and have a mature conversation and say, there are things that we need to talk about. There are things that we need to address, and sometimes, unfortunately, that's not possible. That's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. Some people are not going to own up to their mistakes. Some people are not going to own up to their flaws and problems, past mistakes, and things that caused you trouble and trauma and baggage. People aren't going to sit down and say, yeah, I did you wrong there. I lied to you. I was backstabbing. I was patronising you. I was treating you like this because I wanted to get something. I wanted to do something, and even though I knew it was wrong, I still did it anyway. People don't really often want to sit down, especially with family. And I don't understand that really. I think it should be, surely, family of everything should be the place where people can sit down and settle their differences. I mean, even if you can't do that in one's family, I mean, where can you do it? Where can you get forgiveness? Where can you make amends with people? In a way that's real and honest and true with each other. I can't think of anywhere else where, I mean, apart from like romantic partnerships or like really close friends, I mean, there's no real, there's family are supposed to be everything. And it's like, if you can't really sit down and have a real conversation with certain members of your family, have a heart to heart, I think you're in a very broken family, quite frankly. And I say that as someone that has one. And that pains me to say it, but that's the truth. My family is very broken. My family is damaged, and I'm damaged because of it. And when you can't sit down and have those real talks, let's call them, you can't move forward with certain relationships properly. You can't get answers to things. And sometimes people do that because it's a last-ditch effort to maintain some kind of toxic power dynamic, some toxic sense of control and leverage over members of the family. And that's very real. And I think it's difficult sometimes to understand those people closest to you, because you don't want to damage that relationship with someone. And because of that protective barrier, let's call it, that often means that even those people that are closest to each other are often willing to lie to each other, are often willing to deny things that the other person's saying, even if they know that they are true, because they don't want to hurt people. And sometimes they just don't want to have to be accountable for things that they did to you or to other members of the family. They don't want to admit certain things that you know that they don't know that you know, because they're embarrassed, because they're ashamed of it, because they're, or maybe just because they have no morals. They don't care, and they don't care that you know, and they probably already do sometimes know that you know. This is something else that's very real. Families often say that they have each other's backs and that we look out for one another, but at what cost, and how much of family is real? How much of the dynamics between family members is sort of pressurized, expected, play along with the tolerance party thing, if you like, rather than admitting that that there have been very serious problems in this family for a very long time, and somebody needs to address them so we can try and move on from it. So we can try, because that's the thing, is a lot of people would rather you just didn't bring things up, that you just never bring up again, you just never talk about it. And you might say, well, sometimes that's useful. True. Very true. But also sometimes that can be, I think, very damaging to the future of certain connections in families, because sometimes you do need to talk about things. Maybe there's some baggage between a son and a father, maybe there's some baggage between a mother and a daughter, or whatever it is, right? Whatever the dynamic is, the relationship is. It can be difficult living with knowledge that potentially you can have a better relationship with people if they were just willing to own up to some things, if they were just willing to be able to confront some discomfort about themselves, about their actions. And this isn't about living in the past, this is about trying to move forward. But sometimes in families you can't move on and have a healthier family with certain people, whether it's parents or siblings, whoever it might be, until there are elephants in the room, as it were, that need to be talked about. And unless those people are willing to talk about those things, nothing will ever change. And there'll always be animosity, there'll always be some degree of passive-aggressive hostility and resentment and bitterness towards certain members of family. So my advice would be to have the courage to just open up and tell the truth and be honest before it's too late. None of us are perfect. I've made many, many mistakes that I regret in regards to family, in regards to relationships, in terms of work, in terms of the way that I've handled communication at times with people, in the ways that I've thought about things, the way that I've expressed myself. The list goes on. You know? We're all imperfect. The key is to say, the key is to acknowledge that and to move past it. But the way to move past it sometimes is to have to confront it, is to say, I did something wrong to you, to him, to her, whoever it was. And I realised that it's caused you pain, and it's caused you suffering, and it's caused you to have baggage because of it. And I am sorry for that, and I regret it, and I'm ashamed of it. And I don't want you to have to carry that with you for the rest of your life. Because if people don't do that, then you have to carry that with you, all of that stuff, for the rest of your life. And that often means going to therapy to deal with it, to deal with all of those all that unspoken drama, all that unspoken damage, those ruptured connections with people. And part of the reason why they're ruptured, and they continue to be ruptured and very difficult connections with people, is because we would rather tolerate essentially knowing the elephants are very much present in the room when we're engaged with certain types of people, but not wanting to say anything out loud. We all feel these elephants in the room, and I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. Although there are many different forms of them. I'm sure you have your own. I have my own with my father, with my mother, with my brothers, with my sister, certainly with my uncle in Australia, certainly with one of my aunts. Some very serious elephants, trust me. Very, very extremely damaged relationships, let's put it that way. That probably will never recover. But they had a chance. They had a chance. There's only so much I can say, or anybody can say. But if the effort isn't mutual, if the effort isn't reciprocated, then it doesn't matter what I say. I could say all sorts of things to my father or my mother to try and make our relationship better with each other. But at the end of the day, they're not interested. And I'm just using that as an example, right? But it would. But saying when it comes to my aunt Pat and my uncle Ian in Australia, those relationships are probably forever broken. And part of the reason that is because of the way they treat me and other members of my family, including my mother in particular. But the general attitude and the inconsistencies and the hypocrisy in which those people treat me and members of my family very differently to the other side of the family. And while I can offer some degree of forgiveness perhaps, and a chance to make up for things, if they were willing to, which of course they never will be. They'll never own up to their mistakes. They'll never, ever say the things that me and my family already know. I can't forget certain things, fortunately. I can forgive to a point, probably. But I think forgetting is very difficult for me. Very difficult. And I accept that people are different. People have had their own struggles. They've had their own lives. They've had their own complications. But at the end of the day, there's a thing called growing a spine. There's a thing called emotional maturity. There's a thing called developing trust. There's a thing called honesty. And all of those things are very much lacking by these two particular people. And others, to be fair, in my family. And maybe to some extent, I lack some of that as well. All right? I'm not perfect. I'm not some exemption from the flaws of humanity. Far from it. But I tried with certain people. I really did try. I tried to have it. I tried my best with certain people, I think. And that's their loss. The issues of things like inheritance, for example, lending money, getting money sometimes can throw up all sorts of. It can really make things get very tangled and untidy in families very, very quickly. And people can get very defensive about and very controlling with things like that. They can get very manipulative with things like that. Not just money, but like all sorts of things. Many things, really. And some people just distance themselves because they don't want to be accountable. They don't want any responsibility. They don't want to deal with criticism about them that they know is true. They don't want to deal with the reality of who they really are, not who they show themselves to be to certain individuals, but who they really are. And this imbalance of power, this imbalance of influence, this imbalance of trust is a really damaging part of, I think, a lot of families after a certain period of time. No families are perfect. They've all got their own skeletons in the closets. They've all got their secrets. They've all got their varying degrees of dysfunctionality, I guess. They've all got secrets, as I've mentioned before. And they've all got things that they just don't want to talk about. Ever. And so when you add all this stuff up, you see that you have a very dark, bleak picture. And you can understand why a bit like this picture behind me here. Families are very tricky businesses. Extremely tangled up with all sorts of knots. Let's put it like that. All sorts of struggles, pains, lies, deceit, disrespect. Disappointments. And that's, for me, in my family, a very deep pain, a very deep. It's a struggle to deal with certain knowledge. Let's say it's a struggle to have to live with certain knowledge that I have about certain members of my family, and I'll leave it at that. There are burdens that I carry with me, like my siblings do, that we will never talk about with the average person. Never. And nor should we. We don't have to. We talk about certain things amongst ourselves as siblings, but we wouldn't say half the things we say to each other to our parents. No chance. And I know that there are things that my mother and father talk about that they will never talk to me about. Probably even my brothers, even my sister, maybe with her friends or my other brothers. Maybe there are always going to be things that you don't know about. There are always going to be things that they say to other people that you never hear about. There are always going to be acceptable forms of discussion, communication, topics that certain family members will feel comfortable, content talking about with very specific family members, and other family members will never ever know about it. That is a fact. I wish that wasn't true, but it is. As I mentioned before, I mentioned in other videos about having grown up with domestic abuse. I've talked about alcoholism, addiction, substances. I've talked about unspoken grief before, with regards to my parents and how I think that's damaged them in many ways by not expressing their grief properly, by not opening up about it, and not really explaining what their relationships were with their parents. And that kind of leaves a bit of a void in some way, because then leads me to think, well, why was that? Why did they never really ever want to talk about their parents? Why did I never really hear my father really talk about his dad? Why did I never find out that my uncle never had a wife or never had a girlfriend? Why did he have a mental breakdown? Why did he have the life that he had? What was my mother's mother like, who I never met? I only ever heard snippets about. What was my granddad that I did know? What was he really like, rather than how I saw him as a kid? We tend to idolize people. I think when we're younger, as children, we idolize our parents, our grandparents, our uncles, and I think as you get older, you start to realize that they were also extremely complicated, messy human beings as you are. Probably more, because they were older than you, much older, as and still would be if they were alive today. So you do wonder about things like, how did my parents deal with their griefs and struggles and sacrifices and pain and raising me and my brothers and sister? How did they deal with that? What was that like? We don't talk about these things. These are kind of conversations that they're just unspoken things. There are lots of conversations that I could have had with my grandmother and grandfather before they passed away that I never got to have. And it'll be the same with my parents. There are probably things that I will never get to talk about with my siblings, with my sister, my brothers, even friends, even my wife. That will probably still. There are always going to be things that you just forgot to talk about, didn't mention, didn't think was worthy at the time, didn't pop up in your head. Things that you forgot to talk about, things that you wanted to talk about, but you just never got round to it. You never plucked up enough courage to ask, to talk about something. There are always going to be issues of who you think something's acceptable to talk about with. Who can I talk to about this? Or should I just keep it to myself? You've got issues like favoritism as well. That you might feel, well, it might be, or you might feel that you can talk to someone, but you don't know whether you can trust them. So, it's a whole whirlwind of therapy sessions, basically, I suppose. To summarize it, not to mention, parents being toxic and narcissistic and sociopathic, controlling, demanding, inadequate in all sorts of ways, and essentially trying sort of damaging your confidence, damaging your prospects in life in some sense, influencing you in negative ways that people don't often talk about, that people don't often confront those people that cause them those problems. They don't often confront those things with those people. And so much goes left unsaid in families. So much stuff. So much important stuff, real stuff, that would really dramatically improve the quality of people's relationships in their families. But it just doesn't happen a lot of the time. There are acceptable things you can discuss. There's a certain degree, a certain level of which you can discuss certain things with certain people. And that's it. That's the end of it, really. You can't talk about things to this level. No, you can talk it to this level, and that's it. Or people get bored. People make excuses. I don't really want to talk about that. I don't want to rehash that. I don't want to get involved in that conversation. It's like, but that's the problem. That's why we have a difficult relationship, because you don't want to own up to your mistakes. You don't want to own up to the shitty things that you did during my youth, during my childhood, that were supposed to be a special time in my life, but if I had to deal with all the shit of adulthood. And you ruined that for me. Not only me, but my other siblings. You ruined, and I'm referring to my parents here, you ruined my childhood, my one opportunity to be a child. You ruined that. And for that, I will never, ever forgive you. Never. I will acknowledge you as my parents. I will respect you to a certain point, but I will never, ever forget that what you did to me and my siblings during our youth, and how that damaged, and how that, in a sense, sort of set in motion a series of bad negative influences on us. And I accept that I'm an adult now, but you don't forget things like that. You can't just wash it away and pretend that didn't form who you become, because it has. It doesn't have to become something that you obsess over. It doesn't have to be everything. It doesn't have to dictate your future. No, but it does have a big impact on how you see the world and how you respond to it and what you do with your life, I think. Not to mention all the affairs. Really, when me and my brothers and sisters, well, certainly me and my brothers were kids, we basically looked out for each other, I think, more than our parents did for us a lot of the time, if I'm honest. We had to. Sure, there was sibling rivalry. We have bickered and whinged and fought over different things, sure, but for the most part, we kind of had each other's backs. Especially my older brother. We looked out for one another on the estate that we lived on. We tried to have each other's backs, and we respected each other. We were very different people, very different, especially during our teenage years. But we always looked out for one another. We always tried to. And I tried to do that. I tried to do that for my younger brother later on. And I suppose in my own way these days, I try to look out for my sister as best as I can through giving advice, trying to be a supportive brother, from afar, given I'm not in the same country as she is. So, she's possibly heading off to Australia in a few years, possibly through the help of my uncle, who, quite frankly, I personally don't want anything to do with, because I think he's a fraud. I think he's somewhat of a narcissist, somewhat of a selfish, greedy, two-faced, lying prick. And as for my aunt, my uncle's sister, my mother's sister, she's basically selfish, self-absorbed, cold, heartless, cowardly, pathetic excuse of a human being. And her children, now adult children, yeah, they can all go fuck themselves as well. Because when there's become so much stigma and shame and smearing of reputation, slander and smearing from one side of the family to the other, it just creates a divide, and that's essentially partly why I wanted to make this video, really, because I wanted to get that off my chest. I wanted to express that, really. This is about family, but it is also about this video has been influenced by things that I've felt and thought today and yesterday, and for many years. I think that me and my siblings, we felt kind of abandoned by our other side of the family in some way. After a certain period of time, they weren't interested, they didn't want to know. And there was just a real sense that this thing of like almost a kind of class divide within the same class, that they felt that they were somehow some kind of pseudo working class side of the family, that we were some kind of underclass or something like that. It's kind of mentality of just you're not worthy. We're not going to waste our time on you. You're not worthy of it. You're not worthy. So in the end, I think growing up, honestly, I kind of chose my own family in some sense. Not just for my friends, but for role models that helped me along the way. I can, in particular, the guy called Phil I knew, who was a youth worker. He was a really serious role model to me growing up. As I suppose was my local vicar, Sue. Certain teachers at schools were role models for me as well, in primary and secondary school. And then I suppose later on, as I became an adult, there really were a few people that I kind of looked up to and I had respect for. And they are Keith, Mike, Anne, and maybe to some extent Paul. There was a guy named Paul. Yeah, he was a good guy. Just lost his mother when I was a young adult, 21, 22 years old, and I think he saw that I was lost for a while, and I was confused, and he was someone that I considered to be a friend. I haven't spoken to. I haven't seen any of these people in years. I haven't spoken to most of them in years. But I've always remembered those people. I mean, I'm probably missing people out here. Certainly, Martin from the youth club. At the time, he was a decent guy. Maybe not so much now, but it's a different story. But there were a lot of people, I think, growing up. There obviously people that that were in the 17th Whole Boys Brigade. So Derek, Martin, Cookie, God rest his soul, mentioned him so many times on this channel, I think, at this point. But anyway, yeah, there's so many people that I could really praise, I think, that really kind of shaped me as a person. And I'm very thankful for those people because they kind of became a family, I think, at a time when I had a lot of trouble in my life. I had a lot of soul searching to do. I had a lot of growing up to do. And they saw that in me, and I think they took pity on me, I think, is probably the truth. And I'm very grateful for those people, although I didn't always get along with them. But I think for the most part, they were decent people to me. And even Darren, I suppose I should add Darren to that. Didn't always like everybody necessarily all the time, but I tried to get along with them. And maybe I was immature in some ways towards the end of some of those relationships. Maybe I could have handled things better, and I think sometimes I was a bit ungrateful and a bit needy, maybe sometimes, and a bit kind of. And I suppose I should also mention Monique. Really, I should say that because she was a big influence on me in various ways. So I think I have to include her in that. But a lot of these people kind of became my family. They were kind of an extension of my family. They became role models for me. They became people that I looked up to and I respected, and I wanted to learn from them. I wanted to get, and I think it's because I was overcompensating for a lack of that at home. Basically, I was in need of direction, of advice, of support, of wisdom, and I didn't get that from the people. I didn't. Well, I certainly didn't get enough of it. Or maybe didn't really get much of it at all. I don't know, but so in the end, I kind of went after my own family, and I can understand when people do that when they think like I'm not getting any of this from the people I should be, so I'm going to go out there and look for it. And I think in the end, I've essentially in my family I've developed my closest bonds with my family. Really, at this point, are really honestly my siblings. Really, I think as much as I like talking to my father from time to time, and my mother from time to time. I think it's fair to say at this point I have my strongest connections are with my brothers and sister. Um, I did have a very, very close, strong bond with my late uncle, and my late grandmother passed away in 2008, and also my grandfather, although that kind of got a bit difficult in the end because he was very seriously ill psychologically, and I didn't see him for many years. But I loved these people. I really did love them. I really did care about them very much. And I still do. And I miss them very deeply. And I wish they were still here. I wish I could talk to them and share stories and share how my life's gone on since past, since the last time I saw them. I can remember the last time I saw most of them. But yeah. But out of my closest relatives, I really think me and my younger brother, probably have the strongest bond because we grew up literally in the same. It's sharing the same. We had the same bedroom, and we throughout our entire youth we shared the same room. Whereas I don't know. I think it depends on certain times. I probably had a bit of a stronger connection with my older brother, and then other times maybe with my younger brother. And certainly in recent years, I've kind of managed to finally, I think, have a better relationship with my sister. But that's partly because she's a bit older now. But also, I think it's because we've had time to talk about a lot of things and get some stuff off our chests that maybe we weren't mature enough to do in the past. So I'm happy about that. So, what else is there left to say? Well, sometimes it's difficult to meet everybody's expectations in one's family and outside of it. And sometimes you may have people in your family who expect or have very high standards, who expect certain things from you, and you just don't deliver. You can't deliver that. You can't meet them. You can't give them what they want. And so that also is another area in which sometimes those relationships end up with cracks forming them, as it were, because they don't feel that you've got what it takes to be like them, and so they're forever kind of you get demoted in their list of respects and sort of their hierarchy of worthiness, as it were. And again, that sort of happened to me with a few people in my family for different reasons. And I suppose because of it, I've basically done the same thing as a reaction to it. And another area of one's family is emotional labour. Is that who is it really who holds the family together a lot of the time? I think for me, up until relatively recently, I think it was probably me, actually. Not to sort of blow my own trumpet, but I think it was. It was in many ways me that held the family together in certain aspects. But in recent times, maybe not so much, because I've kind of stepped back and said, I'm not gonna be your personal assistant for everything. I'm not gonna do that. You're gonna do things for yourself. I'm not. Why do I have to have the burden of being sort of feeling this sort of unspoken pressure to sort of be the middle ground, to be the rock of the family sort of thing? Why is that my responsibility? Why is that my duty? And even if you do have a good family, there are always things that can break it. There are always things that can, and things that will always challenge families. Always. Debts, differences in personality styles, and which cause conflicts, rifts between people because of various arguments, money problems, bereavements, especially, that really divide, can create a lot of fractures, a lot of very serious lifelong damage to certain connections. Because sometimes when somebody dies in the family, a lot of things die with that person, in a sense, because the connections, the people that you knew through them, also usually disappear and you never hear from them again. So yeah, that's a real shame when that happens. It can be very devastating, because sometimes it's not just you're not just losing that person, you're losing everything that comes with it. And to think that essentially that one's family is just purely based on unreciprocated whatever, or it's just purely about love or something, I'm sorry, that's just not often the case. There might be a degree of mutual expectedness, I guess, but I don't think it's, maybe when you're young, when you're a child, there's just, well, certainly an obligation to take care of you, but there's maybe a lot more, if you're lucky, love going on for you then often when you become an adult, or rather, maybe it's just it's very differently expressed. And I think you have to be aware of that love obviously evolves as you get older, and how you express that with people changes as you get older, because of how your life's going, how your life's changed, who you've become, who you've evolved out of, because people change, and you move out of variation. You move from one variation to the next, you move from one model of yourself to the next one, and some people like certain ones, some people like multiple ones, some people only like one, some people like the person you are now compared to who you used to be, some people don't, some people prefer the older version. You can't please everybody, you can't be everything to everybody all the time, and you can sacrifice parts of yourself for it, but in the end that won't make you happy, that won't bring you anything good. And family can sometimes feel isolating, can feel lonely, it can feel like often a pressure to conform to the sort of overall sort of culture of the family, if you like, or the sort of standard way that family kind of operates. Then there's things sort of like emotional neglect is a very serious problem in many families, I think, where you exist, your presence is felt, but it's not respected, it's not really valued. You're there, but not really. People are there, but not really. Or people are there where you don't want them to be there. Or there are people that you want to be there that don't want to be there because they don't want to be around other siblings. Or people, there's certain family members that they like more than others. So there's all that kind of crap as well. There's varying degrees of things like gaslighting, manipulation, betrayal going on, even exploitation in some circumstances, as I've already mentioned, favoritism, right? And I think a sense of identity, sometimes people feel like they're in a family, they have a family, but they don't really feel a part of it. And I think growing up, honestly, I felt that in my family. Like I always kind of felt that I liked my family to a point, but I kind of felt like I always felt a bit outside of it. I always felt like a bit of a imposter or something, or some kind of intruder or something. Sometimes, like as weird as it is to say that, I felt a bit isolated in my own family. It felt like I was some kind of a anomaly in that or something. Not dismissed or disavowed or anything. Not like I wasn't like abandoned or anything like that. I just always felt there was always a part of me that felt like I was more independent. Really, I was more of a. I liked my independence more than I liked kind of being around my family in many respects. I didn't hate being around my family, but I think I preferred having my own sense of identity, my own sense of freedom, my own sense of independence away from my family, because I think that for me that was more in many times of my life that was much more healthy, which is one of the reasons why I used to spend so much time spending so much time by the docks on a Saturday morning. It's why one of the reasons why I used to spend so much time in the main the train station. So that's why so much of my time when I was in my late adolescent years, me and my brother, Chris, my younger brother, we used to spend so much time on public transport and traveling around the city and things like getting out of the house because we just felt that it was a much healthier way of. It was a way for us to tolerate our life, and I think me and my brother in particular, kind of perhaps were somewhat similar in that regard. That we both felt a bit of oppression at home. There was a sense of we yes, this is our family, and we respect. We know that that's the reality of it, but just we wish it wasn't. I think we didn't. We liked it because it was stable. It was some kind of security, but at the same time, it often wasn't actually. Because of issues inside the house and because our house got targeted a few times. I will go into that, but basically, yeah, we kind of felt like some kind of alien on the estate. I think at times, I think it's fair to say, and I think just sometimes we just felt a bit alienated. Maybe I certainly did at times growing up. I felt very alienated, and just very different. Wanting to seek something different, and I just felt that I needed isolation from it. I needed to be away from it. I needed to have my own headspace. I needed to be able to just be around something that wasn't constantly asking something of me, that wasn't constantly bombarding me with something that I didn't understand, that I didn't know what to do with, as in dysfunctional habits, toxic behaviors. And it's tricky. So family to me isn't something simple. It's a complex thing. You can have your own flesh and blood family, as we all do, obviously. But family is often, I think, about what you want and what you need, not always necessarily just what is. And I think if you think that, if you feel that your actual family isn't necessarily the healthiest, then I would advise you to seek out some kind of a adopted family, I think. But what I would say, I would try to build as healthy a relationship with your family as you can, because at the end of the day, that is still your family, whether you like it or not. You know, my family is what it is, whether I want it to be or not. My parents are who they are. My siblings and I are. We all are who we are, whether we want to be or not. We are who we are. This is the reality of it, and that's what you have to just sit with. You know, you have to just grow some kind of contentment with that as you get older. That's who they are. You know, doesn't mean you have to be around 24/7, but I wouldn't necessarily just completely abandon them because there are certain things about them I don't like, or there are certain parts of our history that's very tricky to navigate as adults. So yeah, that's all I've basically got to say. Family is very important. Don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, you have to choose a path, a life, and the people that you want to be involved in that. Whether that's directly or indirectly, you have to decide the kinds of people that you want around you, that you feel are the best people for you to progress in life, to become, to try and become the best version of yourself you can become. And if you feel that those people are supportive of you or helpful to you, or you genuinely genuinely are trying to have a good, maybe it's not perfect, but trying to have a good relationship with them, continue with that. Try to do what you can. But remember that we're all human, we're all flawed, we're all basically a bunch of fuck-ups, right? We're all messy, mixed bags of all sorts of things, good and bad. So let's just remember that none of us are perfect. We're all struggling. We've got our own shit show internally to deal with, right? But just try your best to be as decent to your family, as to try to be decent to your family, because you're only going to ever have one, right? And if you don't want that, then that's fair enough. I understand that. I get it. I get why that happens. But don't waste it. Don't waste it, because it's precious. Families, it can be very special thing, but it is vulnerable, and it's it evolves, it changes, it's complicated. But I think if you try, it can be something very special, and it's something very, very valuable. And I don't think you should just throw that away easily. Right. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you for watching the video. It's another long one. I hope you've liked it. I hope you've found this video interesting as the other ones I've done recently. If you've got any thoughts, let me know in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to. And I'll see you on the next video. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye bye.